Almost exactly 1 month ago, Democrats in the U.S. were despondent as the Republican convention wrapped up. And to many, a second Trump presidency felt inevitable. Well, what a difference just a few weeks makes. Tonight, Democrats begin their convention on a high, with Kamala Harris surging in the polls and a star-studded lineup planning to spend the week discussing why she is the right person to lead America into the future. Now, Harris's boss, President Joe Biden, headlines the first night. Later in the week, we will also hear from former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Finally, Harris will take center stage when she gives her acceptance speech on Thursday night. Our coverage begins with CNN Politics senior reporter Stephen Collinson. Stephen, great to see you. Obviously, this convention is going to look and feel much more different than it would have had Biden stayed in the race. What do you expect? What do you hope? What are we going to see tonight?
I think tonight we're going to see an extraordinary moment of a sitting president who was actually pushed aside by his party, forced to end his re-election bid because of concerns about his age, throwing his full support behind his vice president and the new Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris. It's going to be a poignant moment. We know that the president is going to make the case for a vice president Kamala Harris presidency. He's going to call out President Donald Trump by name, according to senior officials. And he's going to warn that democracy is at stake in November's election, very much the theme of the campaign that he was forced to shelve. It will be quite an emotional moment, I think, for the president. He will be effectively ending a 50-year career in politics, although he will still be president until January, whatever happens in the election. And having spoken to a lot of Democrats, especially on the sidelines of Harris events, it's clear that he's going to get a wave of adulation. He's seen as a hero now in his party because he sacrificed his own career in the greater cause of trying to beat Trump.
And a lot of big names expected to speak this week, right, Stephen? I mean, lots of star power that the Democrats have compared to the Republicans at their convention. Former presidents and former first ladies we're going to hear from, which is not what we saw at the RNC.
That's right. The RNC was quite an extraordinary event because it was a sign, and the reality there was that the party has been purged of any forces that have not signed up to the Donald Trump project. So, for example, former President George W. Bush was not at the convention. Normally, you would expect former presidents to speak at the convention. We've got two former presidents speaking at the Democratic event this week, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Obama will play an extraordinary, important role on Tuesday night. He will be trying to cement the pivot from the current president to make the case for Kamala Harris and the need for Americans, in his view, to vote her in November, to continue this long-term Democratic project that really stretches back to his own presidency after the 2008 elections. A lot of Democrats are drawing comparisons between the hope and the euphoria and the enthusiasm that greeted his campaign in 2008. And he'll be trying to, I think, sort of pass some of that aura onto Kamala Harris when he speaks on Tuesday.
You know, we have seen so much enthusiasm and maybe euphoria, since Kamala Harris got to the top of the ticket. But obviously, there's one topic that has divided Democrats, and that is the Israel-Hamas war. There are expected to be protests from pro-Palestinian supporters, but also there is a number of uncommitted delegates. I mean, there's going to be thousands of delegates gathering at the DNC this week, and there are dozens who belong to the uncommitted movement. Will we hear from them?
Certainly we will. The question is whether we'll hear from them inside the hall. There is definitely a possibility of protests. Almost every Democratic campaign event, including those of the current president Joe Biden, and events even with the new nominee Kamala Harris, have been interrupted by protests, campaigners calling for the U.S. to do more to mitigate the Israeli offensive in Gaza following the terror attacks last year. Even last night in the city of Chicago, there were sporadic protests all around the city, small protests, but still very vocal. You had squadrons of police officers on bicycles who would follow around these protests and cordon them off to make sure they didn't cause too much disruption. I think the overarching question is whether the Palestinian protests and the pro-Gaza movement in the Democratic Party, which did threaten President Joe Biden's prospects in a crucial swing state of Michigan, will that translate to the new nominee? It's possible that if she is able to create a wave of enthusiasm in that key state, which could decide the destiny of the White House, the impact of Democrats, Arab American voters, and progressives who are not voting for the Democratic ticket could be lessened by comparison. But it's certainly a worry for the Democrats. They do not want to send the United States a message that they are divided and they have issues with protests.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll watch it closely with you, Stephen Collinson, in Chicago for us. Thanks so much, Stephen. Good to see you. Tia Mitchell is the Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She's joining me now live from the great city of Chicago. Tia, it's great to see you. As you know, I mean, things have changed dramatically in the last few weeks, which means that the Democratic organizers had to rework the programming of this convention. What do you expect to see this week?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Just a couple of months ago, Biden would have been speaking on Thursday night as the party's nominee. Now he's kicking off the conference as, the president who's passing the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris now as the party's standard bearer. So what we expect, particularly on tonight, is for Biden to make the case for Harris. He will continue to talk about framing the election in a way of saying it's going to say that voters need to save and preserve democracy, that former President Trump is a threat. But again, he's going to say, trust the Biden-Harris administration, trust Vice President Harris as an extension of him, as a continuation of him. But I also think there will be speakers that, especially from Biden, but leading up to Biden, a way of giving him his flowers, celebrating him, celebrating his legacy, because he's essentially retiring in a few months at the end of his presidential administration. So I think that'll be a big thing today as well.
Yeah, it'll be a hero's welcome and a send-off that highlights his legacy and what many are describing as a selfless move to withdraw from the race. Again, talking about just how much things have changed in such a drastic fashion. Months ago, you had Biden, who was trailing Trump in the national polls, and now you have two major national polls out. I want to show these quickly amongst likely voters and registered voters. Over the weekend, I think this is the CNN poll of polls, but over the weekend, we had the Washington Post, ABC News, and Ipsos poll, which was the first major national poll that showed Harris with the lead outside the poll's margin of error. She had 49% support from registered voters to Trump's 45% support. And then there's also a new CBS News poll out that shows likely voters nationwide breaking for Harris 51%, 48% for Trump. There's huge momentum for Harris going into this convention, but also a lot of pressure for her.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. I think to your point about the polls, the reason why these national polls are significant, yes, we don't elect presidents by just the popular vote, but pollsters and kind of election prognosticators believe that it bodes well when the Democrat is more than 3 points ahead of the Republican candidate in the national polling. That bodes well for the Democrat to pull ahead in some of these crucial swing states. So You know, when the polling was closer, and of course, especially when Trump was leading in these national polls, it really worried Democrats that Biden couldn't be competitive in these swing states. So that's why they're paying so much attention to the national polling, because they know that Democrats do well with the popular vote. So the Democratic candidate really needs to do much better than the Republican candidate nationally to really be competitive when it comes to the Electoral College. But the pressure is on Harris to deliver, even more so because Biden has stepped aside. And all these standard bearers said, you know, Biden cannot beat Trump. We need a new candidate. They got what they asked for. And what they don't want is in November it to be, well, were they wrong? And were they wrong in putting their trust in Harris? Now, anything can happen. And no matter what happens in November, it won't just be one thing to blame or to credit. But I think because there was this last minute change on the Democratic ticket, you know, if it's not successful, for years we'll be talking about whether it was the right decision.